My granddaddy was a Texas Ranger back during the Great Depression. He passed when I was just a kid, so most of the stories about him I got from my dad, but some of them are some real doozies, and this is probably the one that sticks with me the most. As you can probably imagine, the Great Depression meant a lot of folks turned to crime to make ends meet, and those already raking in ill-gotten gains had to really kick things up a gear to maintain the kind of lifestyle they'd become accustomed to. As a consequence, Cochran County became the bank robbery capital of West Texas, with banks and credit unions in Morton, Whiteface, and Bledsoe getting hit on a daily basis sometimes. A lot of the folks who robbed the Bledsoe Credit Union tried skipping over the border into New Mexico, but the feds got wise to them whizzing off along the 125 and started posting officers over in Tantum where they could head them off and take them into custody. But then, not everyone tried burning rubber down the 125, and a lot more folks seemed to be getting away than my grandpappy and his fellow rangers would have liked. One time, grandpappy trying to track this one bank robber across the state, and this son of a bitch shot a female clerk after she spooked him, so there's no shortage of tips coming in from folks who think they spotted either him or his getaway car. One of these tips is from a guy who said he was 99% sure that he spotted the getaway car in the parking lot of some isolated motel called the Yellow Rose. Granddaddy drives out there to talk to the proprietors, who turn out to be this nice old couple living out a kind of semi-retirement out there in the middle of nowhere. They said the place used to be fairly lively back before Wall Street crashed, but by 1932, it was nothing but a glorified retirement home for them. Hardly anyone stopped by anymore, and whenever they did, the two old-timers didn't bother keeping any kind of record. They just let folks pay their 50-cent rate, pick up any room they like, and then check out whenever they cared to. Grandpappy said that they were both sweet as pie, and they answered all of his and his partner's questions, and they let them both take a look around the place to their heart's content, and they promised they'd be in touch if they remembered anything else. But as far as they knew, Grandpappy's suspect never stopped by, and if his getaway car was spotted in the motel's parking lot, the guy certainly didn't check in with them at the front desk. Grandpappy thanks them for their time, recommends they start making records just in case they have to stop by again, and then off he and his partner go to chase up other clues. But the trail goes cold, and before long, they're forced to focus on other fugitives. A few months go by and my grandpappy and his partner are chasing up some other suspect and some completely unrelated bank robbery, when the name of the Yellow Rose Motel pops up again. This time, it's a guest who claimed to just so happen to have spotted grandpappy's suspect walk into a room carrying the exact same kind of bag used in a liquor store robbery. Again, it seems like they're hot on their suspect's tails, but then they roll up to the Yellow Rose and it was pretty much the same story as last time. No, they didn't have any records of the guy staying there, but they did vaguely remember who my grandpappy was talking about after he showed them both a photograph, and aside from that, they were no help. At that stage, grandpappy and his partner weren't exactly suspicious of the old couple, but they were getting a tad frustrated at how unhelpful they were being. They could be forgiven on account of their age and dispositions, but still, Grandpappy felt like if it were any other motel, he'd have both his robbery suspects in cuffs. And so, a few more months go by and then, yep, you guessed it, the name the Yellow Rose Motel pops up in the witness reports of armed robbery suspect. Once again, Grandpappy and his partner drive out there to talk to the owners, only this time, they catch them in a lie. The witness said the suspect had seemed nervous and unwilling to leave their room. This meant the older man of the couple had to head out to the guy's room every time he had an issue, and apparently he had many. The man admitted to having talked to the suspect, but at first tried to act confused as to which guest the Rangers were talking about. But then, when Grandpappy asked if he'd been in the guy's room, long enough to get a real good look at him, the guy lied and said no. Grandpappy and his partner played it cool. They didn't immediately throw the guy up against the wall and accuse him of lying. That wasn't their style. Instead, they made it look like they were taking the guy at his word and then went off trying to figure out how that nice old couple were connected to the suspects. and Grandpappy's partner thought that it was fairly simple. The old couple were offering shelter to the robbers, so long as they gave them a cut of their take. Rent wasn't 50 cents for folks. Oh no, it was more like 50 which back then was a heck of a lot of money. And the only problem was Grandpappy and his partner had to prove that this was happening, and considering they'd already searched the place pretty thoroughly without anything being found, they knew that wasn't going to be easy. They had to wait months before they heard anything else about the Yellow Rose, and when they did, Grandpappy and his partner just about broke the speed limit rushing to get that scoop. The lead was some bandito some other agency had already apprehended and locked up. He figured his partner had screwed him over on the job, and so he wanted to get even. He told my grandpappy that his partner had not only driven off without him, leading to his arrest, but he stiffed him for half of the money too. And the plan was that if either of them got caught, and one got away with the money, they were to make sure that the other's family was well looked after while they were in prison. The partner had failed to do this, so the prisoner was pissed. He tells Grandpappy all about their plan, which was to head to the place called the Yellow Rose, which helped criminals escape the law in exchange for a cut of the loot. Grandpappy's partner is just about hooting and hollering like, "I knew it, dagnammit, I knew it all along." But a crucial piece of the puzzle was still missing. Grandpappy still had no idea how the old couple were helping their guest disappear, and neither did the prisoner, so there was no putting them in cuffs till they figured that out. They thought about it for weeks on end, with their assistant chief breathing down their necks and demanding results. And then in the end, Grandpappy and his partner came up with a plan. They were going to enlist the help of a third ranger, one the elderly couple hadn't met yet, and they were going to send him in undercover as a potential bank robber-looking type guy to buy their services. They thought the idea was foolproof, especially after their fellow ranger got himself firmly into character. They were dealing with low-down, no-good sons of bitches on a nearly daily basis, so imitating one was as easy as falling off a log, and all they had to do was be patient, gain a little trust, and then they were on for a stakeout. So the first step was obviously to have their ranger buddy approach the couple while undercover to see if they'd help him disappear. He walks in, a couple of minutes go by, then out he comes with a bona fide verbal guarantee that if he shows up with the law on his tail, and he pays them a couple $100, they'll help him vamoose on down to Mexico where the law will never find him. And after that, it was just a case of picking a date and time, playing a phony news bulletin over the radio so the couple really believed there had been a robbery, then having their ranger roll up on the Yellow Rose, tires screeching, and with a big old bag of money. On the day of the undercover job, my grandpappy and his partner went up to a water tower about a half-mile from the Yellow Rose, and they watched the whole thing unfold through a pair of binoculars. The man rolls up, doing close to 100, runs into the check-in office like a man possessed, and then starts yelling about how the cops are on his tail and he needs hiding. The older man helps hide his car in the garage around back. Then they show him where their secret hiding spot is for their wanted fugitives. Grandpappy and his partner are watching as they take their undercover ranger buddy out of sight, with the plan being that when the couple show him what they do with the fugitive, he pulls a gun and 2 pairs of cuffs and then arrests them both. Grandpappy and his partner had no real idea how long that was going to take because how long is a piece of string, you know? But then 30 minutes go by, then an hour, then 2 hours, and they get to wondering what the hell is going on. There were no wires or anything back then, not like all the sophisticated doodads they got today, so they had to just sit and wait, getting more and more nervous until they decided to head in there themselves to search the place top to bottom again. But then, they do go in, and they go in heavy. They got rangers, local sheriff's deputies, even 2 federal agents that drove up from planes at short notice once they heard a Texas Ranger had gone missing. But it was the sniffer dogs that they brought along that found their missing ranger, and unfortunately, it wasn't because they were trained to smell people. Those dogs were trained to smell blood, and boy did they find a lot of it. Out back near the garage where the old-timer kept the fugitives' cars, there was an old rust bucket of a broken-down truck just sitting there. The dogs were all over it, or more specifically, they were sniffing at the ground underneath it before pointing like they had been trained to. The rangers had the broken down truck moved, then they take a look at the patch of dirt more closely until they find what they're looking for. It was a carpet, or a sort of rug, and they brushed dirt and rocks over it, so unless you actually walk on top of the thing, there was no way of knowing it was there. They pulled it back, and right there in front of them was a big old iron hatch leading down into what I suppose you call these days a bunker. And inside that bunker was what can only be described as a kill factory. They had a kill room with a drain and hose for spraying off all the blood. They had a processing room where they could deal with the bodies, but they weren't just disposing of them in ways that no one would ever find them. The complete opposite situation, really. They were embalming and preserving these bodies with a sort of special kind of varnish to stop the skin from rotting, kind of like a taxidermist would. Then, when the bodies were all waxed and dressed and their hair was combed, they'd pose the bodies in a little room like they were all hanging out together. Worst thing is, they weren't doing it because they got a sick thrill out of it. At least the old couple claimed that wasn't the case. They were doing it because they felt bad for the people they killed. They only killed them to begin with because fugitives were bad folks, as they put it, and they never would have killed the ranger if they'd have known that he was an officer of the law. But unfortunately, the ranger left it a little too late to reveal his identity, and the old-timer hit him over the head with a hammer. And by the time the cops got there to rescue him, the old-timer had just about drained all the blood out of his body before processing. They couldn't go burying the bodies on their property, at least not without drawing too much attention, and so they did what, according to them, was the next best thing. Created a kind of mausoleum where these bad men could hang out in a nice room with books, a record player, and a poker table. I'm deadly serious too. They bought all that stuff with the money they got from their bank robbers. Saw it as the least they could do considering they murdered all those men. It wasn't just the 3 guys my grandpappy was looking for either. They killed 4 more criminals they figured had a bunch of ill-gotten money on their person, and they'd been at it for years too. It was a very big story around Cochran County at the time, but I guess it never took off around the county because there was no big trial to play out for the cameras. The older man had a heart attack in his prison cell, and it turned out his wife was dying of cancer anyways because she passed away in the night before they could even get her arraigned. Dad said Grandpappy never did get over sending his ranger buddy in there first. Always said it should have been him. And I guess that's why he drank so much, which is why he passed when I was just a kid. And so all in all, I guess that old couple played quite a significant role in my family's history. And it's a hell of a thing to consider. Even worse when you remember they considered themselves good people. Hi, let's read. My name is Dinesh, and I was born in Sri Lanka, but I've been living and working in Mumbai, India for the last 20 years. My daughter came across your YouTube channel around Halloween of last year, and at first, I wasn't sure if she should be watching such scary stories. But since she started watching, her colloquial English has improved a lot, and I'm happy to say that you're having something of a positive influence in her life. There's also another, albeit a little bit of an unusual reason why I'm happy she's watching your channel, and that's the fact that you take viewer submissions. She's 14 years old now, and although we have a fairly good relationship, there have been times when we've gone through some strain. Now, for example, when she was 12, she got into a habit of slamming her bedroom door whenever she was angry with school or her friends or what have you. Every time she did, which wasn't very many times, I was absolutely livid, more furious than she had ever seen me before. She felt victimized, and I can understand. Her brother has broken a window with his cricket ball before, and I didn't get as angry as I did. And I tried explaining that it was the sound that bothered me so much, but she didn't understand and wouldn't accept my apology. But she doesn't understand because there's something she doesn't know, and it concerns something that happened to me just a few years before she was born. Something that resulted in me suffering from a very prolonged and very acute post-traumatic stress disorder. For the life of me, I can't find it in myself to tell her what had happened to me, and so instead, I think I might ask you to do it for me. I used to be employed as a floor supervisor at the Taj Mahal Hotel here in Mumbai, and I first got the job in early 2008 when I was still just the tender age of 24 years old. I was very proud of myself to attain such a lofty position at such a young age, because it came with a lot more prestige and pay due to the heightened responsibility. It could be very stressful at times, because my bosses could be very hard on me, but it meant that I could seriously consider starting a family as my salary and lodgings had made me a very eligible bachelor. Just under a year into working there, I thought I could see myself working here for a long time. But then one night, everything changed. It was around 9:30 p.m. when it started. The hotel was bustling with guests and staff, and we were all very busy, and it was business as usual. Then suddenly we heard what sounded like firecrackers coming from the lobby downstairs. But our confusion turned to pure terror when we realized it wasn't firecrackers, it was gunfire, and our terror only intensified as the sounds drew closer. I was in the lobby when I saw people running, their faces painted with panic, and I remember the distinct smell of gunpowder drifting in the air. I remember ducking behind the reception desk. My heart was pounding at a mile a minute, and over the chaos, I could hear guests screaming as they tried to make sense of what was happening. These terrorists were members of a group who called themselves Lashkar-e-Taiba, who are a Pakistani-based militant group, and after forcing their way through the main entrance of the hotel, they began firing indiscriminately. They had automatic weapons, and their bullets tore through marble and wood, and the destruction from just a few bullets was horrifying. They tore that hotel apart. They were part of a group of 10 attackers who arrived in Mumbai via sea, more almost like a commando operation than a terrorist one, and then instead of attacking military, police, or infrastructure, they were gunning only for the innocent, unarmed civilians. And from my hiding spot, I saw some of my colleagues on the ground, and I couldn't tell if they were just taking cover or if they were hurt. Then I saw one of the terrorists dressed in black with a backpack firing at the chandeliers and laughing as the glass pieces shattered. And that's when I realized that they were crazy, maybe high on drugs or something too, because they were shooting at anything. Perhaps in frustration because there weren't as many people as they hoped gathered in that lobby that evening. I managed to dial the emergency number, and I whispered our location and the situation to the dispatcher, begging them to send help as quickly as possible. And the next thing I did was the only thing I could think of to help prevent more losses of life, and I went back into the hotel's corridors to help guests find a way through the staff corridors and away from the gunfire. You see, the terrorists were not just shooting randomly. They were systematically moving through the hotel, searching for foreigners. I could hear them shouting in Urdu, demanding to know where foreign guests were staying, particularly British and Americans, and they were looking for high-profile targets, tourists, and anyone who could be considered an enemy. Myself and a handful of guests hid in one of the staff-only areas trying to stay silent, listening to the attackers moving through the hotel. We could hear their voices whenever they got close to our hiding place, and it made me tremble with fear every time they fired a shot. We began to smell smoke after a while too, and realized that they had set fires because the smell of gasoline, or some type of accelerant, I'm not certain, was very pungent in some areas. They seemed to be moving from room to room on the lower floors, breaking into guest rooms in the restaurant areas and then setting the place on fire, in the hopes the entire hotel might burn down. I heard them in the Wasabi by Morimoto. It's the upscale Japanese restaurant where they had taken hostages, forcing guests to the ground and shooting some if they moved or didn't comply. But anyone who had a Western passport on their person, they were executed without any questions. After a while, we started to hear explosions. These terrorists had brought hand grenades with them, and they were throwing them down corridors to flush out anyone hiding. I saw one explode near the kitchen area where some of my colleagues had taken refuge, and the blast was followed by screams and then silence. The terrorists then set up positions on the upper floors, using the vantage point to shoot at anyone trying to escape, and then shooting at the police as they began their response. There were reports of them shooting from windows at people below or at any movements outside, and it seemed they intended to hold the hotel and use it as a stronghold so the killing could continue. At one point, this was perhaps the most chilling moment for me personally, the terrorists used the hotel's internal communication systems, or the PA, to taunt and threaten us. They said all Hindus were allowed to leave the building, as long as they told the terrorists where any Western guests were hiding. And I must have shown some kind of silent reaction on my face or in my eyes, because one of the Western guests started to beg me in a sort of whisper, "Please don't leave us." I told her I would not, and I meant it from the bottom of my heart. Not just because I would not be able to live with myself, but because I knew it was a lie. There was no way that they would miss the opportunity to shoot somebody like me, especially now that the police were outside shooting back. Leaving my hiding place meant certain death, so I stayed right where I was and prayed for a quick ending. Eventually, the sounds of the Indian security forces engaging the terrorists reached us. It was a mix of relief and terror knowing that while help was here, the situation was far from over, and so we just stayed low, praying for it to end. When the shooting had finally stopped, we heard men speaking Hindi and English telling us to come out and that they were the police, and the relief that we felt was monumental, a feeling I will never forget. The once grand Taj was now a mess of bullet holes and blood and broken glass. I saw some colleagues that were injured, others I would never talk to again. The aftermath was a blur of helping where I could, guiding dazed guests to safety, and basically anything I could to delay my own emotional reaction. That was my way of dealing with it, being selfless, completely forgetting myself, because when I remembered it all, when I allowed myself to process what had happened to me, it was just too devastating. And the days that followed were filled with grief, and every time I tried to sleep, the nightmares would have me reliving the whole situation all over again. And the hotel, like the wider city, has healed, but the memory of that night has remained a constant in my life ever since, and the same is to be said for all those who have lived through those attacks. It was something I lived through, and I have talked about it with others, but I don't know how to tell my daughter why her father is the way he is. And so maybe, after this, she will understand why I got so angry when she slammed the door. It wasn't anger that she was seeing, it was fear, because that noise took me right back to the Taj, on what I thought would be my last night on Earth. Many years ago, I decided to take a road trip from Florida to New Mexico to visit my adopted Aunt Linda. She's my adopted aunt because, well, I didn't have much family growing up, and since she was years older than me and treated me like family, I just started calling her my aunt one day, and it kind of stuck. We first met when we were living in Clearwater, but she developed respiratory problems as she got older and moved to live with an old friend of hers in the drier climates near Albuquerque. We had a sort of tradition of having a fancy day from time to time, where we'd really treat ourselves, go shopping, then go eat somewhere incredibly fancy as like a sort of big morale booster. And when we first met, I wasn't doing so great. I was young and fresh out of a relationship, and part of being my shoulder to cry on was taking our very first fancy day, which fast became a tradition. And so to save enough money as possible on that trip, so I could spend as much money as I wanted while I was in Albuquerque, I started looking for cheaper hotels and motels outside of Shreveport city limits, which is where I usually spent the night after around 12 to 13 hours of driving. I found what I thought was a cute little guest house called the Hotel de Ville, and at $20 a night it was considerably cheaper than most of the other options in downtown Shreveport, and it looked considerably nicer too. I called in advance to make sure that they were okay with late check-ins, and I mean late too, because I sometimes didn't make it to Shreveport until late at night or very early in the morning. But then, once they confirmed that they could handle that, I booked a room and was excited to see what the place was like in person. If it was as nice as it looked, then I'd probably be a returning guest around 2 or 3 times a year. But as it turned out, I'll never be going back to the Hotel de Ville for as long as I live. And so, like I said, I didn't get to Shreveport until late at night. But just as they said I'd be able to, I checked in with the late-night desk clerk and was given my room key. The place seemed really nice, but when I asked how many guests they had checked in, the desk clerk said that I had the place to myself. I thought that was kind of odd because nice hotels like that are very rarely empty, but having the place to myself felt kind of luxurious, or maybe more like peaceful. And so instead of overanalyzing the situation, I just went to my room and got ready to take a shower. I didn't unpack right away. I just grabbed what I needed for my shower, which included a toothbrush I hadn't taken out of the wrapper yet. I unwrapped it, opened up the little mini trash can to throw the wrapper away, but noticed that there was no trash bag in there. You know, like the little white kind that goes in the smaller cans like that. I thought about heading back to the check-in desk to ask the night clerk for one, but then I remembered that I had a little one of my own from CVS that I picked up my travel toiletries in, so I decided to use that one instead. I opened up the trash can and found it was one of those where you have to sort of slide out the plastic liner before putting a new trash bag in, so that's what I did. But then, I slid out the little black liner. I saw someone had scratched a single word into the plastic. Trafico. Now, from having told this story so many times now, some of you are probably going to be yelling at your phones or computers or TVs or whatever, something like, how could you not know what that means? Well, although I don't speak Spanish, I kind of do know what that means. It's just that what you're probably thinking right now didn't occur to me at the time at all. I was so tired from driving for so long that I honestly just thought, what a weird place to tag something like that. Like, of all the places to scratch your name or probably a nickname by the looks of things, why do it there, where most likely only the hotel's housekeeping would see it? I shrugged it off, put the trash can back together with a bag in it, and then threw away the wrapping and box for my new toothbrush and toothpaste. I then took a shower, walked back into my room, toweled off, and then started looking around for where the room's hairdryer was kept. And since from experience that's usually the deepest drawer or cabinet in the desk or bedside table, that's where I went first. I checked the little cabinet and the bedside table first, and bingo, there was the hairdryer. But after I took it out, I saw that there was a little piece of paper underneath it. Now, my first thought was something like, this better not be a piece of paper that says not working or all that, because I was very much looking forward to actually drying my hair. It's kind of relaxing and soothing. But when I took it out and unfolded it, I saw that all it said was, "Help me." And the second I laid my eyes on those words, my heart kind of skipped a beat. I checked the back of the paper, but there was nothing. That's all it said, "Help me." I looked around the room again, my eyes darting to every corner as this sudden feeling that something was badly wrong took hold of me. I was irrationally terrified that someone was in the room with me, but it was just me, alone with this creepy silence in the air. I didn't know what else to do. I wasn't sure if just a note was enough to call the cops over, so I took it down to the front desk to ask the clerk what he thought we should do about this. And the guy was still there, sitting at the desk reading a magazine and looking like he'd rather be at home in bed. I explained the situation, told him maybe someone had been scared or in fear for their life in that room that I was in, but after realizing all I had was a handwritten note, he just sort of dismissed the thing as sort of a little prank. I asked him how he could be so sure that it was nothing to be alarmed over, and he responded by asking if there was anything broken, or any blood or anything like that. There wasn't. There was only the note, and then when I made that clear, he said what I'd been thinking, that it wasn't enough to call the cops over, so unless I wanted to check out or move rooms, there wasn't much else that he could do for me. I walked back to my room and just sort of sat there for maybe 10 to 15 minutes and then repacked my stuff and actually checked out. I literally felt like I was about to be the star of my own horror movie. I've listened to enough of your podcasts to know what happens next. Like I was about to get the dumb female supporting actress whose sheer ignorance and naivety gets her chopped to pieces in the opening 10 minutes. I'm not saying the clerk was in on it, and it was some kind of murder hotel like that H.H. Holmes freak that DiCaprio is set to play in that new movie. I just grabbed my bag and hurried out to my car and then drove until I found a quiet spot by the side of the road, away from any buildings, just trees and darkness. And I parked and locked the doors, and ironically, I felt way safer out there in my small car than that sort of eerie hotel room. I know I could have drove back into Shreveport to maybe find some place there, but I was just so tired and couldn't face the disappointment of going through the whole ordeal just to pay a bunch for a crappy hotel room. I tried to sleep, but even with how exhausted I was, it took me way longer than it should have. I couldn't stop thinking about that note, and I settled on the thought of I really hoped it was a prank, because the idea of thinking someone had left that note there, genuinely, and I found it out way too late, it just made me sick to my stomach. With the attitude the clerk took of just, oh well, it was probably just a prank, it's no wonder you hear all these horror stories about women getting kidnapped and trafficked in those kind of places. Oh yeah, and back to that trafico thing. So when things finally went down on what that word really meant, I actually called the hotel to tell them how I thought both the note and scratched trafico word might be connected. It wasn't the same clerk that was on duty the night that I checked in, but I told them what room number I was staying in and where exactly the word had been scratched. And the nice lady told me to wait a minute while she went to check the room, and then came back a minute or so later to tell me that I must be mistaken. I said, "No, I think you're mistaken, ma'am," and then told her a second time exactly where the scratched word was. She told me that she had the exact trash can I was talking about on the desk in front of her. It hadn't even been emptied yet, and still had my toothbrush wrapper in it. She pulled out the plastic insert I was talking about, but according to her, there was nothing on it. And that's when I realized. Either she was lying to me, or the clerk on duty that night had swapped it out as soon as I'd walked out of the building. And whichever it was, I wasn't getting anywhere with that lady, so I just thanked her for her time and hung up, and just kept on driving towards Albuquerque. I told my Aunt Linda all about it when I finally got to her, and she took all that confusion and fear away with 5 little words. You did the right thing. Even if it was just some dumb prank, I did the right thing in alerting the clerk and then getting out of there when I didn't feel safe anymore. And then for all I knew, the person who wrote that note did so a long time before I found it, in which case their situation could have quite easily resolved itself. Linda helped me rationalize it, square it away in my head, and then after that I started to feel a little better. And I'm not saying I'm haunted by what happened because, like I said, I don't know for certain what I found that night. But even today I still wonder if I came across something very, very dark, and only just touched the surface of what's going on at that hotel. Nestled along the banks of the Taedong River, the North Korea capital of Pyongyang is perhaps one of the most unsettling and enigmatic places on Earth. Befitting its moniker, the Hermit Kingdom grants entry to only a limited number of curious tourists each year, and those welcomed are subjected to incredibly strict regulations. Visitors must always be accompanied by a guide and are only permitted to visit a handful of carefully selected and delicately curated locations. Then, as for their accommodation, visitors are usually checked into one of the only hotels in the entirety of North Korea that permits foreign guests, a stark beige monolith known as the Yeonggakdo International Hotel. At 400 meters wide and deep enough for the passage of large ships, the Taedong River is one of the largest in North Korea and boasts a great number of larger and smaller islands. One of these islands, known as Yeonggak, is located almost smack bang in the middle of Pyongyang and is home to the eponymous International Hotel. Constructed in the late 80s on the island's far northern tip, And opened in 1995, the 47-story hotel essentially serves as a containment compound for North Korea's foreign visitors, and guests are only permitted to check in following a thoroughly extensive background check. Upon entering the Yanggakdo Hotel, guests are greeted by high ceilings, marble floors, and dark leather seating, touches of rare opulence in a country like North Korea. But plastering the lobby's walls are garish reminders of both time and place. Vast hand-painted murals depict heroic, larger-than-life figures engaged in key moments of North Korean history, such as the nation's founding or their supposed victory in the Korean War. Others show scenes of joyful workers, farmers, or soldiers, all embodying the spirit of self-sufficiency and loyalty to the state. In each image, everyone is smiling, everyone is joyful, but they are masks which hide a terrifying but wholly unspeakable truth. Upstairs, rooms are decorated in very neutral shades of beige, cream, and light green. The furniture is functional, the bathrooms Spartan but clean, yet the hotel's more public spaces are anything but ordinary. At the top of the hotel sits a slowly revolving restaurant, offering diners a 360-degree view of Pyongyang while enjoying a blend of Korean and Western cuisine, while the hotel's casino attempts to add a touch of Vegas to proceedings with red carpets, gold fixtures, and the tinkle of slot machines for ambiance. The hotel's basement hosts a gift merchant, a one-stop shop for all your propaganda needs, where things like books, badges, and posters are available to purchase. However, there is another area of the hotel that is strictly forbidden to its guests, and have thus become a subject of deep curiosity to both visitors and observers alike. The hotel's staff refer to it as the communication and rebroadcasting floor, but guests simply refer to the place as the fifth floor. Many believe the fifth floor serves a dual purpose within the hotel. The first is to monitor the movements and communications of the hotel's guests. The second is to ensure the compliance and loyalty of the hotel staff. Unlike the rest of the hotel, the fifth floor is said to be decorated in the style of a North Korean military installation, with endless grays and aggressive propaganda replacing the soft colors and warm welcomes of the wider hotel. Yet the fact remains that no one actually knows for certain what occurs there. Seldom has North Korea permitted Western photographers onto the fifth floor, and their explanation of the floor's purpose has been vague at best. Many know better than to go snooping around restricted areas in a country suffering a brutal dictatorship, but the same could not be said for one particular visitor to the Yanggakdo International, who through either valor or vacuousness decided to find out for himself. Born on December 12th of 1994 in Cincinnati, Ohio, Otto Frederick Warmbier grew up to be an intelligent and gregarious young man. Upon graduating high school, he studied commerce and economics at the University of Virginia and spent a year at the London School of Economics as part of an exchange program. It seems his visit to the United Kingdom sparked a deep wanderlust in young Otto, and over the years that followed, he traveled to Cuba, Ecuador, and a host of other European countries. By the summer of 2015, Otto had turned his sights on East Asia, and after some searching, secured a free trip to Hong Kong via another study abroad program set to commence in January the following year. But while researching his exciting new adventure, Otto came across a group known as Young Pioneer Tours. Run by two Western men and operating out of a Chinese city close to the North Korean border, Young Pioneer Tours advertised trips to destinations your mother would rather you stay away from, including the isolated and insular nation of North Korea. The tour group claimed to operate in close conjunction with North Korean authorities and that all visitors, including United States citizens, could be guaranteed their safety if they obeyed the rather expansive list of rules and regulations. Otto became captivated with the idea of visiting the capital of the so-called Hermit Kingdom, and told his father he wanted to experience the North Korean culture and people for himself. He checked his schedule, realized he could attend a 5-day New Year's tour before departing for Hong Kong, then flew out to Beijing on December 29th of 2015. Upon his arrival in Beijing, Otto met with other members of his North Korean tour group, which to his surprise included 10 other U.S. citizens. Then, after presenting Chinese authorities with special permits, they boarded a flight to Pyongyang and touched down in the early hours of New Year's Eve. After disembarking the plane, the tour group was immediately separated from their fellow passengers. They were then driven directly to the Yanggakdo International Hotel, where they checked in and were given some breakfast. After that, Otto and his fellow tourists were taken to Pyongyang's Kim Il-sung Square, which features galleries, museums, and a national library known as the Grand People's Study House. The square is cleverly designed to create an optical illusion, whereby the center of the square stands lower than the nearby riverbank. This creates the impression that the 170-meter-high Juche Tower, which stands on the opposite side of the Taedong River, is sprouting from the end of the square, when in reality its foundations lie much further away. Otto's North Korean guides were keen to showcase such architectural feats. Then, after a short stop at the Austrian-style coffee shop attached to the Korean Central History Museum, they returned to the Yanggakdo Hotel. Following their evening meal, Otto and his fellow guests were invited to partake in alcoholic beverages at the hotel bar. They were also invited to enjoy the annual New Year's Eve fireworks display, taking place at midnight over the waters of the Taedong River. But aside from that, they were not permitted to leave the hotel premises for any reason whatsoever. Scouser Danny Grattan, a member of the tour group from Liverpool in the United Kingdom, told journalists that he, Otto, and a handful of other tourists spent the evening getting drunk in the hotel bar. They watched the fireworks around midnight, ordered a few more drinks from the rather terse North Korean bartender, and then retired to their rooms at around 1:30 in the morning. Danny Grattan remembered Otto being quite intoxicated, but otherwise in control of himself. What happened next suggests otherwise. Otto was known to thoroughly research his prospective travel destinations, and he'd no doubt done a lot of prior reading to the Yanggakdo Hotel. Since visitors are explicitly warned to stay away from the hotel's communication and rebroadcasting floor, many returned home with eerie stories regarding the mysterious fifth floor. Otto had almost certainly heard of such stories, and likely harbored his own personal curiosities. He'd also no doubt observed how quiet the hotel was in the wee small hours of the morning, so whether out of bold inebriation or some other unknown inclination, Otto crept out of his hotel room, walked down to the elevator, and hit the bright red call button labeled 5. When the elevator door opened in front of him, Otto Warmbier found himself on the legendary 5th floor of the Yanggakdo International Hotel, and all the stories were true. The color scheme was metallic, the hallways seemed endless, and the garish propaganda posters which lined the walls were unlike any his guides had permitted him to see. One image showed a North Korean tank crushing American and South Korean soldiers under its treads. Another depicted North Korean soldiers with bayonets, advancing on a scene where an American soldier threatens a mother and a child. The American is depicted in a grotesque, monstrous form as he lunges at the terrified mother, while the handsome and heroic North Koreans rush to save her. Other posters depicted the U.S. Capitol building in the moments before being struck by a North Korean nuclear warhead. "The U.S. will be crushed first if they invade us," the caption read. Otto was no doubt exhilarated to have snuck onto the 5th floor, and after perusing the hallways for a few minutes, he decided to head back to his room for the night. But not without grabbing himself a little souvenir in the form of a North Korean propaganda poster. It's unclear which poster he took, and frankly, no one is 100% certain if he even stole one or not. But 2 days later, as Otto arrived at Pyongyang International Airport to await his flight back to China, he was arrested by North Korean officials. Danny Grattan, the Liverpudlian on the tour, later issued a statement to the Western press. "No words were spoken," Grattan said. "2 guards came over and simply tapped Otto on the shoulder and led him away. I just said kind of quite nervously, 'Well, that's the last we'll see of you.'" There's a great irony in those words because that was the last physical time I saw Otto, ever. He didn't resist. He didn't look scared. He sort of half smiled, then off they went. As the decidedly nervous tour group boarded their plane, Grattan hoped Otto would suddenly walk through the hatch, a relieved smile on his face. But the only other person who did was a North Korean police officer. Otto Warmbier is very sick, he said, and has been taken to the hospital. A representative from Young Pioneer Tours attempted to talk to the officer, but was informed any further communications would have to be conducted via official channels. North Korean air traffic control then ordered the plane to depart, and having little choice in the matter, the pilot opted to obey their commands. Otto Warmbier had been left behind. In the days that followed, the country's state-run Korean Central News Agency announced that Otto had been detained for a hostile act against the state. They refused to provide any further details for weeks on end, but during this period, a Young Pioneer spokesperson told Otto's parents, as well as the Reuters news agency, that there had been an incident at the Yanggakdo Hotel. And to their knowledge, Otto had obeyed every rule and regulation put to him, but since their relationship with the North Koreans had suddenly soured, they were unwilling to provide any further information on his arrest or detention. Otto's parents had to wait a full 6 weeks before they got any answers, at which point they came from the lips of their own son. On February 29th of 2016, the North Koreans held a press conference in which Otto was paraded before their state media. Reading from a prepared statement, Otto confessed to the attempted theft of a propaganda poster from a restricted area of the second floor, with the changing of the 5th to 2nd floor being a way of deterring future thefts. The poster, which supposedly said, "Let's arm ourselves strongly with Kim Jong-il's patriotism," was intended as a harmless souvenir. But in the eyes of the North Korean judiciary, its attempted theft represented a serious crime. Otto also went on to state that the attempted theft had been committed on behalf of a Methodist church in his hometown, as well as a secret fraternity at the University of Virginia known as Z Society. However, both groups denied any association with Otto, with Time magazine later calling the accusations fanciful and implausible. Many believe the confession to have been coerced in some way, as not only did one observer remark that Otto was clearly under duress, but countless other former prisoners have detailed horrific torture sessions in which they were forced to issue false and damning statements against themselves. On March 16th, a U.S. envoy met with 2 North Korean officials to negotiate Otto's release. His attempts were unsuccessful, and just hours later, Otto was convicted in North Korea's Supreme Court on charges of subverting Article 60 of North Korea's Criminal Code. His trial, which lasted just 1 hour, included evidence such as CCTV footage, fingerprint evidence, witness testimony, and Otto's own coerced confession. The CCTV footage showed a man, identified as Warmbier by his North Korean guide, entering the staff-only area. This was followed by the release of a brief low-resolution video time-stamped at 1:57 a.m., showing a figure removing a poster from a wall and placing it on the floor. A hotel staff member told the court, "When I got off work, there was nothing amiss, but when I returned, I thought someone had deliberately taken the slogan down, so I mobilized security to prevent damage to it and reported it to the authorities." In his confession, Otto claimed that he had abandoned the poster after discovering it was too large to carry away. "I never should have allowed myself to be lured by the United States administration into committing a crime in this country," he said, in a statement quite clearly written by North Korean spin doctors. "I wish that the United States administration never manipulated people like myself in the future to commit crimes against foreign countries. I entirely beg you, the people and government of the DPRK, for your forgiveness. Please, I made the worst mistake of my life." His pleas fell on deaf ears. The court held that he had committed a crime, and I quote, "pursuant to the United States government's hostile policy toward North Korea in a bid to impair the unity of its people after entering it as a tourist." He was then sentenced to 15 years of hard labor in a North Korean prison camp. Human Rights Watch labeled the hearing a kangaroo court, while describing the sentence Otto was given as outrageous and shocking. And despite North Korea's claims to the contrary, U.S. State Department spokesman Mark Toner stated it was clear that they had arrested an American citizen purely for political purposes. Otto's parents, Fred and Cindy, met with numerous Obama administration officials, including then Secretary of State John Kerry, but North Korean diplomats proved prickly at best. It wasn't until June of 2017 that negotiations bore fruit, when Secretary of State Rex Tillerson announced that North Korea had released Otto following a full pardon for his crimes against the state. However, during a June 6th meeting with North Korean officials, a representative of the U.S. State Department was informed that Otto had contracted foodborne botulism shortly after his sentencing and had fallen into a coma after taking a sleeping pill. U.S. officials asked North Korea exactly how long Otto had been in a coma, and the answer they got was as shocking as it was horrifying. 15 months, they were told. On June 13th, Otto arrived at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center, where medical staff tried to determine what caused his coma and if there were signs of recovery. Doctors soon determined that Otto was in a state of unresponsive wakefulness, more commonly known as a persistent vegetative state. He was able to breathe on his own and blink his eyes, but otherwise showed no signs of being aware of his environment. The medical director of the team which transported Warmbier back to the United States stated there was every indication that Otto had adequate medical care during his detention. However, the release of 2 scans showed extensive damage to his brain, which doctors believed was consistent with a cardiopulmonary event that caused the brain to be deprived of oxygen. It wasn't exactly clear what had caused such oxygen deprivation. There was no evidence of botulism, nor was there any evidence of torture or abuse, and scans of Otto's neck and skull were normal outside of the already identified brain injuries. In fact, as one doctor phrased it, for somebody who had been bedridden for more than a year, his skin and body were in excellent condition. Otto's father held a press conference on June 15th but declined to answer questions pertaining to his son's injuries. However, he did state that not only was he furious with the North Koreans, but he didn't believe a word they told him. There was no excuse for any civilized nation to have kept his condition secret and to have denied him top-notch medical care for so long, he said. Sadly, following a week of discussion with expert medical officials, Otto's parents made the decision to have his feeding tube removed, and he passed away at 2:20 p.m. on June 19th of 2017. He was just 22 years old. Otto's parents released a public statement thanking the hospital staff for all their hard work, while President Donald Trump at the time condemned the brutality of the North Korean regime. North Korea, on the other hand, claimed they were the situation's biggest victim, accusing the United States of a smear campaign while stating their treatment of Otto was humanitarian. A spokesperson for the communist nation said, "Although we had no reason at all to show mercy to such a criminal of the enemy state, we provided him with medical treatments and care with all sincerity on humanitarian basis until his return to the United States, considering that his health got worse." At the request of Warmbier's family, no autopsy was performed and only an external examination was conducted. Medical examiners came up with a variety of theories for what caused Otto's oxygen starvation, including blood clots, pneumonia, sepsis, or kidney failure. They also said it was plausible that sleeping pills could have caused Warmbier to stop breathing if he had botulism and was paralyzed from it. University of Cincinnati doctors found no evidence of botulism, yet several experienced neurologists asserted that, given the length of time before Otto's return to the United States, botulism could not be altogether ruled out. The U.S. coroner who examined Warmbier's body after his death said that Warmbier's body showed no obvious signs of torture, but the word obvious is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Otto could have easily been subjected to advanced forms of water torture. In fact, some have theorized that being waterboarded too heavily was the exact cause of Otto's oxygen starvation. Many who asserted that Otto had been tortured in direct contravention of the coroner's reports were ridiculed by those who failed to take such methods of torture into account. But in 2019, a Korean-American businessman detained at the same time as Otto claimed he'd seen a young Western man, almost fainting, and being dragged across a hallway by investigators with his head and face soaked with water. This sighting might have taken place just moments before Otto fell unconscious, never to wake up again. Otto's funeral was held on June 22nd of 2017 at his former school, Wyoming High. More than 2,500 people showed up to say goodbye. He was then buried at Oak Hill Cemetery in Glendale, Ohio, where students tied ribbons on every tree and pole along the funeral procession's 3 miles route, all the way from the high school to the nearby cemetery. A week later, the United States government announced that it would ban American tourists from visiting North Korea, with Warmbiers' detention and death being cited as a contributing factor. In 2022, Otto's parents announced the creation of the Otto Warmbier Scholarship Fund, with his first recipient being North Korean defector Sa-Young Lee. Around the same time, Sa-Young Lee gave a talk at TEDx UCLA entitled Our Bubbles of Certainty, A Perspective from My Life in North Korea. It's a very poignant talk, and one highly recommended to those who wish to know more about the Orwellian horrors of the Hermit Kingdom. Michael Kirby, chairman of the United Nations Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in North Korea, once wrote that Otto's fate has become a metaphor, a kind of symbol, of a big story about thousands of nameless statistics locked up and oppressed in North Korea. They are voiceless, but Otto Warmbier speaks of their suffering from his grave. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos on YouTube every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams on Sundays and Wednesday nights. And if you got a story, be sure to submit them over my email, letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click the big join button here on YouTube to hear about the extra perks for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories and big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All of these links are down below. Thank you so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.